Welcome to At Forest Edge, a podcast for the woman who asks the deeper questions, who finds God in the ancient stories, the forgotten myths, and the hard places of her own life. I'm Rihanna Tilley, a watercolor artist, a storyteller, and a woman who has stood at the edge of the dark wood and found that the light was there all along. Pull up a chair. Let's follow this thread together. I want to talk to the woman who knows exactly what joy is supposed to feel like and cannot find it anyway. Not the woman in a crisis, though she is welcome here too. I'm talking about the woman whose life from the outside looks like it has everything it needs. She loves her husband. She loves her children. Her home is full of good things. And underneath all of it, there's a flatness she cannot explain and carries a quiet shame about, because she knows she should feel more than this. And the gap between what she feels and what she thinks she should feel has become its own kind of grief. Or maybe she is in the grief itself. Maybe something was lost, a person, a hope, a living thing she tended carefully, and the world kept moving, and everyone around her seemed to expect that by now she would have found her way back to happiness, and she has not. And she's starting to wonder if she ever will. I know both of those places. And I want to tell you about the second one because it is the most honest thing I have to offer in this episode. During the pandemic, I was 18 weeks pregnant when our daughter stopped living. I will not replay all of it here because some things are too sacred to rush through, but I want to tell you about her because her life has a purpose, and I believe part of that purpose is this. Her name was Autumn Grace. After we lost her, we planted a little gem magnolia tree in the garden. It bloomed in October. Every year, right when we would remember her. It smelled like lemons and fresh air. It was beautiful. It was the most hopeful thing I owned. Every October when it opened its blooms, it felt like a whisper. She's still here. She's still real. She still matters. Time passed. We had a baby boy. Life continued forward the way life does. I loved my husband, my children, our home. Nothing was seriously wrong. And then one year, the tree died, and something in me went with it. What followed was a depression that felt less like sadness and more like oppression, a heaviness and a darkness that had no logical explanation given the circumstances of my life. I knew the truth. I knew my daughter was more than alive than I was, that she was whole and held and waiting in a place I will one day find my way to. I knew I had hope. But the enemy found the open door of that grief and walked through it, and the thoughts that came were not my own. It was not until I recognized that these thoughts did not belong to me, that this darkness had a source outside of myself, that I prayed with everything I had and commanded it to leave, and it lifted. Immediately, like a hand removed from over the light. And joy came back, not as laughter, not as the absence of sorrow. It came back bubbling up from somewhere underneath the grief, warm and real and entirely independent of my circumstances, which had not changed at all. The tree was still gone. October was still coming. Autumn Grace was still not here in the way I wanted her to be. But joy was present anyway, deeper than the grief, underneath it, surviving it, outlasting it. Joy is so much greater than a mere laugh. I know that now in a way I could not have known it any other way. We still do not have another magnolia tree, but it is time. And when we plant it, and we will, it will bloom in October and smell like lemons and fresh air and hope. And I will know that both things are true at the same time. The grief and the joy, the loss and the hope, the sorrow and the bubbling up of something the enemy could not keep down forever. That is the fruit I want to talk about today. Happiness and joy are not the same thing, and the difference between them is everything. Happiness is circumstantial. It rises when things are going well and falls when they are not. It is tied to what is happening around you and to you and for you, and there is nothing wrong with happiness when it comes. It is a gift. But it was never designed to be a foundation because circumstances are always shifting, and a foundation that shifts is not a foundation at all. Joy is something underneath happiness, something that persists when happiness cannot, something that was present in me even when the tree died and the darkness came, buried under the grief, temporarily obscured by the oppression, but never actually gone. Because joy is not housed in circumstances, it is housed in a person. And that person does not shift. A woman can be grieving and joyful simultaneously. She can be in the hardest season of her life and still have access to something that sustains her from the inside. Not because she is pretending the hard thing is not hard, but because underneath the hard thing, there is a root system the hard thing cannot reach. The Greek word for joy in Galatians 5:22 is chara, and I want to show you something hidden inside it. Chara, joy, gladness, delight. But chara shares a root with charis, the Greek word for grace. Joy and grace come from the same place. They are related at the root, which means that biblical joy is not something you work up or manufacture or find when circumstances finally cooperate. It flows from the same source as grace. It is received, not achieved. You cannot earn it any more than you can earn grace. You can only open your hands. Joy and grace from the same root. The same hand that gives every unearned gift gives joy, which means it is available on your worst days as surely as your best ones. It is available in October, in the grief, in the season when the tree dies and the darkness comes and the circumstances have not improved at all. Chara is not the reward for surviving your hard season. It is available inside it, because it does not come from the season. It comes from the same place grace does, freely, unearned, offered by a God who does not wait for your circumstances to improve before he gives you what you need to endure them. Alongside chara is a Hebrew word for joy that carries a completely different texture, and I want you to have both because together they paint the whole picture. Simcha, joy, gladness, mirth with a communal celebratory overflowing quality. A joy that cannot stay contained, that spills out into song and dance and shared celebration. Not a quiet, private feeling, but an expression. The kind that makes Miriam reach for her tambourine, that makes David dance before the ark, that makes a father hitch up his ropes and run down a road toward a child he thought was lost forever. Chara is the deep rootedness, joy as an anchor, quiet and unshakable, present in the grief, surviving the darkness. Simcha is the overflow, joy as an expression, the bubbling up. I described it after the oppression lifted. The warmth that came back was not a quiet settling, but as something that moved and spilled and could not be contained. Both are the character of God. He is the deep, quiet anchor and the Father running down the road. He is the still, small voice and the one who exalts over you with loud singing. Both dimensions, all of it, available to you through the Holy Spirit who produces this fruit, not in the absence of sorrow, but right in the middle of it. Nehemiah 8:10 says, "Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Now, I want to give you the context of this verse because context is everything. The people of Israel had gathered to hear the law read aloud for the first time in a generation, and as they listened, they wept. They heard how far they had strayed. They heard the distance between who they were called to be and who they had become. And Nehemiah said, "Do not weep. This is a holy day. The joy of the Lord is your strength." Not your joy in the Lord, though that matters. The joy of the Lord, his joy, his delight over his people in their returning, the simcha of a God who cannot contain his pleasure when the beloved comes back. That joy, his joy over you, his delight in you, his pleasure in this very moment of your returning or your surviving or your simply still being here. That is your strength. Not something you generate, something you receive from a God who is running down the road toward you right now with more joy than you have ever felt in your life. The strength you need for today is not something you have to manufacture. It is already being offered from the one whose joy over you has never once depended on your circumstances being right. Nearly every culture across human history has told a story about the return of spring. The world goes dark and cold, seems to die. And then something returns and the flowers come back and the long winter ends. The Greeks told it as the story of Persephone, carried away to the underworld, the earth going barren in her absence and then her return, and the flowers returning with her. Every culture has its version of this story because every human heart has always sensed the same truth, that darkness does not have the final word, that winter ends, that something always comes back. The lily of the valley is one of the first flowers of spring in many traditions. It grows in the low, shaded valley places, not on the mountaintop, not in the full sun, but in the sheltered, quiet places where the light filters down gently and the soil stays cool. It blooms when the world is just remembering that winter does not last forever. Small, bell-shaped, carrying a fragrance entirely disproportionate to its size. It was always the right flower for joy because joy, real chara joy, Holy Spirit joy, does not grow on the mountaintop. It grows in the valley, in the grief. In the October when the magnolia blooms and you stand in the garden and feel both the sorrow and the something underneath the sorrow that will not be moved. Every culture that told a story about spring returning was reaching toward the same empty tomb, the same morning that changed everything, the same God who takes the thing that looks like the final ending and makes it the beginning of something that has no end at all. Autumn grace is more alive than I am. I know that with a certainty that grief cannot shake. And that knowing, that hope, that is not wishful thinking, but the settled conviction of a faith rooted in resurrection, in the deepest root of the joy that came back after the darkness lifted. The winter does not last. The lily of the valley blooms in the valley, and the joy that returns after the long dark is not the same joy that was there before. It is deeper, more rooted, more unshakable, having survived the thing that tried to take it. So what does this mean for your actual daily life? For the woman who's in the flatness right now, or the grief, or the October, or the season where the circumstances have not improved and happiness feels unavailable, and she is not sure joy is either. It means you do not have to manufacture what you cannot feel. You cannot produce chara from your own reserves, especially in the seasons when those reserves are empty. That is not a failure of faith. That is the design of the thing. Joy was never meant to originate in us. It was meant to flow through us from its actual source. The Holy Spirit produces this fruit, not you. Your part is not to feel more joyful through sheer determination. Your part is to stay connected, to keep walking, to open your hands even in the grief and say, I cannot produce this, but you can, and I am asking you to. That desperate prayer I prayed when the darkness lifted, that was not impressive theology. It was not eloquent or composed. It was the prayer of a woman at the end of her own resources, reaching for the only source that was actually sufficient. And the joy that came back after was not something I generated. It was something that was given, bubbling up from underneath the grief like a spring from deep in the earth. Independent of the circumstances, independent of the season, independent of whether the tree was still standing. That is what the Holy Spirit does. He produces in the soil of a surrendered life the fruit that no amount of surviving could have grown. And joy, chara, simcha, the deep anchor and the overflow, both is available to you right now. In whatever season you are in whatever October you are facing, open your hands. It's already being offered. I want to tell you a brief and beautiful thing before we close. I was at a craft fair with my Flowers of the Spirit paintings, and a woman stopped at my table. She was looking at the lily of the valley, and something in her face changed. It reminded her of her mother. She purchased it and carried it away. And I thought about her for a long time afterward. I saw her again at a second fair. We recognized each other. She let me hug her, and I thought, that is what the fruit does when it takes root in a life. It leaves something behind. It travels. It finds people at a craft fair table when they least expect it and gives them back something they thought they had lost. A memory, a fragrance, a presence that outlasted the person who first carried it. Joy does that. It outlasts the people who carried it. It gets passed down. It finds its way into a small painting of a small flower in a low valley place and crosses a table between two strangers and makes both of them richer for the moment. I painted joy as the lily of the valley because it grows where joy is hardest to find and most needed, in the low places, the shadowed places, the places that look from the outside like they should be too dark for anything beautiful to grow. Each tiny bell-shaped bloom carries a fragrance far larger than its size suggests. It was always the right flower for this fruit. If you need something to hold onto from today, a small reminder that joy grows in the valley, that the bell keeps ringing even in the dark, that the strength you need is already being offered from a God whose joy over you has never once depended on your circumstances. The lily of the valley is at my website at forestedge.com. It is there if you need it, a blessing, not a requirement. Joy is not the absence of sorrow. It is not happiness waiting for better circumstances. It is not something you manufacture when you finally feel ready or healed enough or sufficiently grateful. It is chara, grace-rooted, freely given, flowing from the same hand that gives every unearned gift. It is simcha, the overflow, the bubbling up, the God who runs down the road and cannot contain his joy over the returning beloved. It is the strength Nehemiah pointed toward, not your joy in him, but his joy over you, offered freely in your weakest and most undeserving moment. It grows in the valley, in the October, in the season when the tree dies and the darkness comes, and you pray the desperate prayer with everything you have left, and the light comes back. And it is greater, so much greater than a mere laugh. In the next episode, we're going to talk about peace, the fruit the world cannot give and cannot take away, and I will see you there. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. This episode carried something precious, and I do not take lightly what it costs to share it. If you are in your own October right now, if the darkness feels heavier than the circumstances warrant, and the joy feels very far away, I want you to know that the thoughts that do not sound like you may not be yours. Name them. Pray with everything you have. Command what does not belong to leave, and open your hands for what the Holy Spirit is already waiting to give. Also, don't be afraid to look for help. Sometimes just having someone who understands grief there with you, even a professional, can make you feel less alone. So if this episode found someone who needed it, someone in a valley, someone whose tree died, someone who has forgotten that winter does not last, will you send it to her? She may not know she needs it. Send it anyway. Until next time, the bell is still ringing. Listen for it in the low places, and know that the joy of the Lord, his joy over you, is your strength today. Thanks for sitting with me a while at the edge of the forest. If today's episode stirred something in you, come find me at forestedge.com. That's where you'll find my art, my book, The Happy Little Sunflower, Finding Hope in the Valley, my newsletter, and a way to reach me directly. I'd love to hear what's on your heart. Until next time, may you keep walking toward the light even when the path is dark.